Not on the cloud.
Okay, I guess we're ready to get started.
Yes, we are. We are. So, good morning, everyone. Once again, welcome to the Cultural Integration Fellowship. We were founded in 1951 by Dr. Haridas and Beena Chaudhary as a center of universal religion and spiritual practice. And in keeping with the spirit of unity and diversity, we honor the spiritual traditions of diverse cultures and religions. Today's topic of the talk is practical applications for solving the existential crisis of humanity through the evolution of consciousness. And we are delighted to have Santosh Krinsky giving this talk. Santosh has a long relationship with the Cultural Integration Fellowship. He was familiar to both Dr. Haridas Chaudhary and Beena Chaudhary. And it was through my conversations with Beena that I came to know about Santosh. Santosh has been studying Sri Aurobindo's writing since 1971 and has a daily blog at sriaurobindo.wordpress.com and podcast at anchor.fm/Santosh-Krinsky. He's the author of 16 books and is editor-in-chief at Lotus Press. He is president of the Institute for Holistic Education, a nonprofit focused on integrating spirituality into daily life. He has spent more than 48 years building and developing infrastructure for publishing, distributing, and educating about the spiritual path of Sri Aurobindo, as well as developing and guiding companies at the forefront of publishing books and distributing books and products to support the natural market as well as the metaphysical market in North America. Now, before I hand over the screen to Santosh, I would like to read a poem from Dr. Haridas Chaudhary. It's a short poem, but a beautiful one. And this is from the collection, once again, The Rhythm of Truth. Thy name is wisdom. O the supreme mystery, unfathomable in essence. Thou art visible only to the soul's inward eye, for thy name is wisdom. Thou art wisdom in social development, wisdom in cultural unfoldment, wisdom that forgives the hand that crucifies, wisdom that tolerates the tongue that vilifies, wisdom that reveals the grandeur of truth, wisdom that teaches the unity of all beings, wisdom that fights universal freedom to win, wisdom that sees pervading all existence, one all fulfilling spiritual essence. Let's take a moment of silence to dwell on those beautiful words. I welcome Santosh Krinsky back to the fellowship once again.
Well,
Thank you for
Thank you.
agreeing to give the talk, Santosh. Over to you.
Welcome to everybody. A couple of points real quick. We've got a lot of ground to cover this morning. So I'm hoping if you have any questions or notes or anything you want to make, please mark them down and we'll cover them towards the end. And in the meantime, we're going to roll through this stuff here because there's a lot of content. So the topic, solving the existential crisis of humanity through the evolution of consciousness, needs a little bit of parsing because people don't always recognize what is this existential crisis. You know, we talk about, oh, there's climate change and there's various problems that are coming up and people are fighting with each other, but we don't really put it all together as an interrelated complex of symptoms of a larger issue that we're trying to deal with here. Climate change is basically not just global warming, but it's the impacts that take place. With global warming, you have, as we see the forest fires, we see the increased intensity of the storms, we see droughts, we see floods. But what we're not recognizing is that the glacier melt that's taking place in Greenland and elsewhere is driving a lot of very cold fresh water into the oceans and changing the salinity of the oceans with potentially catastrophic impacts. We're not seeing that this same process is destroying the coral reefs, which are the incubators of the food chain in the ocean, if you will. And we don't see that the fresh water supply of the earth is dwindling dramatically, and that places like Lake Mead are drying out. The Colorado River, another major source of water for the Western US, is drying up. And there are serious implications of every one of these changes that lead to the pressures that bring upon us war, drought, famine, pandemics, mass migrations, people fighting over basic resources. So all of these things, they're not separated symptoms. They're actually part of a complex of the disease, which I call the evolutionary crisis of humanity. According to scientists, we're in the midst of what we call the 6th major planetary die-off. They're calling it the Holocene die-off because we're in the Holocene era. And basically they're saying that the species die-off that's taking place today is 100 to 1,000 times the background rate of species die-off that takes place on the planet sort of naturally. This is at a level that equates to the time of the destruction of the dinosaurs, when the asteroid hit and there was a global winter, you know, for many, many, many years. And we're in the midst of that process right now. What people don't recognize is that part of this includes the die-off of the pollinators. We hear about the many species of bees that are disappearing. And basically all of our fruits and vegetables depend on pollinators. Now, let's say this, the mental approach of our scientists and engineers is working hard to solve that one. They're designing little miniature drone bees to pollinate things so that when there are no real bees around anymore, we'll have these buzzing little drones flying around pollinating things. Great illustration of the mental approach to solving our problems, but it doesn't get to the root of the issue. We have an imbalance in access to resources. Our economic and political systems are based in the mental consciousness. And everybody has their own ideas, the religions, the philosophies, the political systems, the economic systems. Everybody has their own sense of what it is it takes to solve our problems. And unfortunately, they all disagree with each other. And therefore, we wind up with what we see today in the world, which is political gridlock and control by certain individuals of mass amounts of resources without the ability to distribute them equitably across the planet, which accentuates the pain, the suffering, the anger, the disruption, and the wars, the fighting, and the migrations that take place. Albert Einstein had an interesting statement that I always like to remind people of, and that's that he said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And so the existential crisis that we're facing cannot be solved with the kind of political and economic and societal solutions that the mind comes up with. And that's why we have the gridlock that we face today, because nobody has an answer at that level. Mental solutions have not worked and will not work. We need a new paradigm. It's at this point that Sri Aurobindo comes into the picture. And I have to say, back in 1971, when I first came across Sri Aurobindo's The Life Divine, I was struck by how prescient and how clear his view of the process of what I would call the evolution of consciousness, or what he calls the evolution of consciousness, was. If you look at evolution, well, let's step back one step. The crisis we're facing today is not an impossible challenge. It may seem impossible if you really spend time focusing on all the things I just mentioned. You'd say, how are we going to get out of this? Some people want to just go to Mars and abandon the world. Other people just hope that somehow big tech is going to solve all these problems and we're going to come out of it. But it's actually part of a deeper process of nature. Nature creates a major crisis for us to be able to thereby, or for all of existence to thereby make the next evolutionary leap. When we are happy, satisfied, contented, everything going fine, we don't make the efforts to change things. And as a result, we need, and we see in humanity's history, we need a major crisis to focus our attention. And so nature presents this crisis to us. And that gives us the energy to move to the next cycle of evolution. If we look at the evolution of forms, and we go back to Darwin, and he said, oh, there's an evolution of forms, and the different beings evolve one from another. He got the mechanism pretty much right. What he didn't get to was the underlying impetus, the impulse that creates the evolution of forms. What is it that drives us from one level to the next? And that is where Sri Aurobindo comes in by pointing out that behind the evolution of forms is an evolution of consciousness. You see, if you go back billions of years, you see purely material forms, you see rocks, you see magma, you see volcanic action, you see possibly solar energy and water and air, and that's about it. You don't see any living forms there. Somewhere, somehow, a consciousness existed, was involved in the process. And that consciousness, when the forms were prepared, when the forms were ready to accept it, could bring forth life. Now, not every bit of matter is prepared to bring forth life. You can sit on and hibernate with a rock, a piece of granite, or a piece of volcanic magma for 1 billion years, and you're never going to wind up with a living being coming out of it. That's not how it works. What happens is that as the material substance subtilizes, gets prepared to carry the spark of life, in those parts of matter, life begins to evolve. We see the development of metals, we see the development of crystals, and then we see the development of material forms that can actually hold the life energy, at which point life evolves. Similarly, if we move forward, we see that you go from the one-celled plants and the animals to very rudimentary forms that have very rudimentary mental process. Eventually, the mental process develops. When the forms are ready to hold them, they evolve, but they were involved there. And we see that now with our understanding of genetics and the function of DNA that encodes what's what and what comes out of it. You're not going to get a monkey out of an acorn, and you're not going to get a human being out of a seed of a plant. There's an encoding that takes place, a consciousness that is involved that permits that evolution to take place. The evolution of consciousness is not completed. And Sri Aurobindo has mentioned that man is a transitional being. Basically, the mental being that we embody in our most ideal form is basically not the end of evolution. Just as life evolved out of matter and mind evolves out of life, he termed the next level of evolution to be beyond the mind, which he called supramental, literally beyond the mind. It's a new form of consciousness that is taking birth within the crisis of evolution, within the crisis that we're facing today. And that is really the secret of why we're struggling with this. We start to see the signs of this taking place, the development of new ways of looking at things, new ways of addressing things. The mind is extremely linear and blinkered and focused, and it sees one line of approach and doesn't respond to the completeness, the wholeness, the oneness of its life and its environment, its circumstances, and its surroundings. So the supramental evolution begins to see things as part of a oneness where we take into account the cradle to grave thinking, the symbiotic relationships. People say, oh, we need to plant trees because we're deforesting trees and they hold carbon dioxide and they create oxygen. Well, we're actually one being with the trees. We provide the carbon dioxide that they need to survive, and the trees provide the oxygen we need to survive. And not just the trees, all the plants. Actually, the single-celled plants in the ocean provide more oxygen than trees do. And we're in the process right now of destroying the ocean food chain, and we're seeing the collapse of the fisheries taking place. These are the existential crises we have, because without the oxygen that they create and without the food chain that they nurture and supply, humanity is basically going to go extinct. That is the nature of our challenge. The supramental consciousness looks at things holistically, globally. It sees that all of the different solutions and all of the different viewpoints and all of the different philosophies and all of the different economic systems and all of the different political ideologies have some grain of the truth within them, but not the entirety. And it is time to have a new view of that. And humanity is preparing, just as matter was prepared so that certain parts of it would hold life, and life was prepared so that certain parts of it could hold the mental consciousness. We see certain aspects and parts of humanity that are developing in order to hold this new paradigm and this new energy. And people who are motivated to try to live a life that brings in, contacts, and retunes their awareness towards this new status of consciousness. So looking at that, we turn to the type of projects that are taking place all over the world that are trying to embody the new paradigm. We see, first of all, let's look at what the mental consciousness is trying to do, because it recognizes this problem that we're facing. You look at big tech projects and they say, well, we need energy production, we need water production, we're going to drop an enormous power plant of $10 billion into the middle of some village in Africa, and that's going to solve their problem. We're going to put in a bore well project or a water supply project with a huge water plant, and it's going to cost $5 or $10 billion, and that'll solve that problem. And what they're not seeing is that these enormous high-tech, high-cost projects do not fit into the environment within which they're being placed. And so they find after some years that these projects tend to fail, and they don't accomplish what they expected them to accomplish. That is essentially a mental approach to things, and it's not sufficient for where we are today and where we need to be. So what a number of people are starting to do is trying to look at the entirety of the situation. And we come then to the project of Auroville, which has some 55 or 60 projects going in different fields in order to begin to apply a new paradigm to many, many different fields of human endeavor. not that any one of them is going to solve the problem of humanity, but that they can begin to integrate this new comprehensive understanding into the way we address the issues we're facing. One example is they have a reforestation project. And when they went to do, when the normal mental solution to reforestation was illustrated some years ago in the island of Haiti, they had a big hurricane, they lost a lot of trees, they needed to reforest. And the governments of the world decided, okay, we're going to do that. And so they took a lot of tree seedlings and they dropped them from the sky, and they got about a 15% uptake of surviving seedlings and declared success. It just so happens that the reforestation project that was successful in Auroville had an experimental team in Haiti, and they did their method of reforestation with something on the order of an 80% success, or 5 times the success rate of trees surviving and thriving to the normal process used by the mental consciousness. How did they do it? What they did when they started in Auroville, which was a denuded plain of eroded land, the first thing they did was they said, well, what is the natural flora and fauna in this area of India? And so they went and sent teams around to study local areas of forest to see what type of plants grew there, what the trees were, what the understory was, what the symbiotic relationships were between the plants in a successful, thriving forest area in that part of the world. After doing that, they begin to bring in the right type of trees, the right type of supporting plants. And if you look at Auroville today, it's amazing. I mean, it's like an amazing forested area that is rich and lush, and beyond what they brought in from the natural surroundings, the other plants and the fauna, the animals, the insect, etc., that belong in that type of area, that type of forested area, basically joined of their own to create a diverse, rich, natural, thriving, forested environment that is salvaging that eroded land and turning it into what you might call a tropical paradise. So the difference of the two approaches, in my mind, represents the difference between the mental linear blinkered approach and a more holistic approach that looks at the entirety of the picture, the complete relationship of oneness of all the beings that together make an ecosphere. So in Auroville, they're doing research on a number of areas, not just reforestation, but in things like architecture. The Western approach to global warming is, well, crank up the air conditioning. And of course, cranking up the air conditioning simply makes it worse. You feel better short term, but you're using more hydrocarbons and you're putting more global warming into the atmosphere by doing it. So you haven't solved the problem. You've put a Band-Aid over a symptom and you feel good about it. The approach in Auroville is tremendously different. They look at it and say, well, if we could design buildings that do not need as much energy for heating or cooling that could use natural materials and natural design elements in order to optimize human comfort without the input of extraneous energy, we could help to keep people more comfortable and at the same time not further contribute to climate change and global warming. And so they've done a number of these types of experiments with architecture, and they found they can use less air conditioning. Another experiment is to use hemp to make hempcrete bricks. Now, hempcrete is much more environmentally friendly than using concrete. The Western approach, the world approach at this point, is to use concrete, which is one of the most intensive water and energy usage industries in the world. Hempcrete, on the contrary, is much more energy friendly, and it has better survivability. It's stronger. It's also got a better index for how it moderates and insulates energy. So it's a better building material. It's more durable, and it costs a lot less in terms of loss of water and energy. So it's a better solution. And so they're experimenting with that. I understand they're starting to work with the concept of 3D printing of buildings. And if they develop that, and that's just in its infancy right now, you take the hempcrete and you take 3D printing, and you can begin to design buildings using these new architectural concepts that will be truly revolutionary and uplifting. So this is a direction that we see there. The other thing they're looking at, for instance, is with the collapse of the ocean fisheries, there's 1 billion or more people who are going to be starving on this planet, and they're not going to like that. They're going to fight for their survival. They're going to migrate. And this is happening right now. We're overfishing the oceans at a tremendous rate, and we're getting these huge trawling nets out there and just scooping up everything in the ocean. So in addition to climate change destroying the food chain and the incubation through the coral reefs, we're scooping up everything that's mature and less mature in the entire ocean food chain, and basically denuding the oceans of the fish. Well, I'm a vegetarian. That doesn't affect me. I'm actually a vegan. So personally, I don't eat fish, but there are 1 billion people on the planet who do. It's going to affect things. And this isn't going to get solved unless we change that. Well, how do we change that? We need to find alternative food sources and protein sources. So in Auroville, they're working on the idea of developing algae-based foods and soy-based foods that can hopefully be developed as alternatives over time to help replace the missing food items for a large segment of humanity. You can see a theme here going across each of these projects, and there's some 50+ projects. One of them is called EcoFem. It's basically to help empower women to play a more direct and equal role in society, whereas over history, they've had a difficulty both with being the carriers of new birth and the reproductive cycle and the menstrual cycle. So EcoFem says, instead of shutting women out, they're developing reusable menstrual pads that are very low cost and educating women on how to use them in places where they haven't had it, so that they can have much more involvement in their social lives in that society than they have when they're basically kept out for 10 days or a third of the month, you could say, every month, in addition to their childbearing period and their child rearing period. So Auroville has so many numerous projects that it's become a beacon for people who are interested in solving the issues. Now, let's say this, Auroville has its own issues because just like everywhere in the world, there's human beings living there, and the human beings are living primarily in their mental consciousness, and they have different viewpoints about things. And so they're also being confronted with the issues of human unity at a much more intense level, because they've got people from many, many different cultures, backgrounds, educations, languages, religions, etc., all trying to find a way to live together there. And I'm expecting that one of these days they will do that. But in the meantime, they have to face these issues while they work on the larger ecological and environmental and existential issues that we all face as humanity. One of the things that has come out of this in the last couple of years, Auroville International USA has developed a project called Flourish. And you can look it up at aviusa.org/flourish. And that project is there to support the Auroville projects that are doing these various things and to help them flourish, with the idea that they should be reproducible, scalable, and sustainable. And so instead of dropping a large water plant or a large electrical plant into a local community where the people aren't prepared for it and aren't able to support it and deal with it, they want to find projects that are low tech, that are suited to a local environment, and that the local people can apply themselves, instead of someone coming in from outside and doing it for them. They want to provide projects and opportunities that people can apply locally and grow with and live with, using the methodologies similar to what we spoke about with the reforestation program. There are also programs in waste management. Pollution and waste management is one of the largest problems we have as humanity, because we do not recognize what we call the cradle to grave of the things we produce. And so we put large amounts of plastic material into the oceans, and we're creating a huge garbage patch in the oceans, which complicates that problem because we have no solutions. The solution we have as mental beings is, let's ban plastic straws. And I guess that's fine, let's ban plastic straws, but we haven't got to the root of the problem there. So there's a group at Auroville working on how to deal with waste management, really looking at the end products of what we as humanity are creating in order to live on the planet. How to make sure that we have a life cycle that incorporates the death of our finished goods and reincorporates them in. And that project is called Waste Less. Each of these steps is looking at one aspect of the larger issues of humanity. So I've become a big fan, if you will, of that Flourish project. And I think it's not that that project alone is a solution, or that Auroville alone is the only place where these things are happening. We see rising up all over the world these ideas and these visions. Auroville may be one concentrated beacon of experimentation in these directions, but in reality, there is one, as Teilhard de Chardin said, one noosphere, one mental atmosphere that permeates the entire planet. And as some individuals begin to link to this new paradigm, this new consciousness, we find that it's popping up everywhere in the world. And whether people recognize and talk about Sri Aurobindo or not, or the mother, is really not the relevant point. The relevant point is, are people starting to recognize our interdependence with each other and with the world we live in? Are we looking at the oneness of the universe? Are we recognizing that we need to be living in a harmonious way to our environment and with others? And are they starting to develop solutions that implement this paradigm? And Auroville then becomes one point of light, one example of what's happening and starting to happen all over the world. And that is the sign to me that the next phase of the evolutionary development of consciousness is becoming active and is starting to address the imbalances that our mental consciousness has inadvertently created. What you may say are the unintended consequences of the development of mind now have to be addressed as the intended solutions of the supramental consciousness. And so I think that's basically what I had to say today. I'm sure there are some questions and some discussions, so let's open it up. We have a few minutes left.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Santosh. That was absolutely wonderful. A beautiful structure to your talk when you outlined the nature of the problem of existential crisis and that we as humanity are facing. The cause of the problem, of course, the mental, and the solutions, and Auroville as a case study. So that was absolutely beautiful, very much in line with what both Mother and Sri Aurobindo have emphasized, that mind is certainly not the instrument for knowledge, but it can be a wonderful instrument for conveying knowledge. And I think that came out very, very beautifully. Thank you once again. Let's open it up for comments, questions, interactions, and so on and so forth.
Hi, Santosh. This is Mike Hebel. My reflections. The evolution which we have seen since the Big Bang has been, at least from the perspective of the modern mind, extremely slow. That it takes millions and millions of years for these changes that you have talked about to occur. What's the impetus now, or the propulsion now, to speed that process up? And it will have to be sped up at lightning speeds in order to occur.
Well, that's a wonderful question. And it's something that Sri Aurobindo and the mother have actually addressed. And that is that through the conscious participation of the human being, the mental being, we are able to do things that could not take place at the same speed through the unconscious, slow evolutionary process of nature. Now, this is an unproven concept for us, and we're either going to survive or die, whether this succeeds or not. But Sri Aurobindo and the mother felt that as human beings wake up and become aware of this and start to consciously align themselves with the need and the steps to develop a relationship to this new consciousness, that it can take place much more quickly than what we might call evolutionary time that you're speaking about. And we'll see. I mean, one of the concepts that I've always enjoyed was the idea of the 100th monkey. And that is that at a certain point in time, when enough beings of a certain species learn something, that it quickly can promulgate across that entire species. And so we don't need 8 billion people all to evolve to a new understanding for that new understanding to become operative. We don't know how many it takes for that 100th monkey to operate, but under the pressure that we're in right now, I'm hoping that this process will in fact take place relatively quickly.
Thank you.
I'd like to, this is Ricky Polycove, and on the heels of what Mike Hebel just expressed, I've basically had a 41-year career in medicine and have proposed to the women that see me and the clinicians that I teach that there is biologic evolution, which is what Santosh, you've so beautifully outlined, which is that very slow, in a certain sense, randomly selected adaptive capacity for life, a la Darwin. And then that healthy biologic evolutionary being has this other opportunity, which is supermind, but that awareness that I think Gregory Bateson expressed, you know, in the anthropology literature many, many years ago, that everything's connected to everything. And so one of the joys I feel presently, as discouraging as the science is that we have a university, California Institute of Integral Studies, founded on Haridas Chowdhury's teachings, timeless teachings, that in the midst of everything, CIIS is in better shape than ever. And so I'm pretty optimistic that with the kind of wrestling and entropy that we have with our courageous students, that we're sowing the seeds in a way, you know, that is in harmony with Auroville, but with sort of tentacles that are far-reaching, because so many of our students are international, as well as zealot, local, you know, US-based students to make the world a better place. So I see signs that are actually optimistic in the midst of the shadows.
Well, that's great. You know, a lot of people say that entropy, or the dissolution of systems, the winding down of energy, is inevitable. And I actually see it in the opposite way. I see that you have an increasing concentration of consciousness through time, and therefore we're not in a phase of entropy, we're in a phase of concentration and increase of energy. And if you look at it that way, eventually this next transitional step will be completed and the new consciousness will take its role in the universal creation. There's no doubt in my mind.
And I think at least, you know, where science meets the ineffable is what one might call simply the power of prayer, but this higher mind state that actually exerts a force. And that's where I think it's incumbent upon all of us who hold that wish and that ardent, loving light to invest in that. You know, and that, again, I don't say that at the end of a continuing medical education talk, but there's a lot of literature in medicine published really since the 70s, but it's incredible, showing the effect of distance healing on biologic outcomes. So we have many examples where it actually affects human feelings and enlightenment that appears to come from nowhere. Like, I didn't even try that hard and didn't have to have ayahuasca or LSD, but now I understand I'm at one with everyone. So, you know, we have to beam that a little bit more assiduously towards China, I think. So we have a few billion people to come onto the party.
Thank you, Ricky, and thank you, Santosh, so much for your talk. I appreciate it greatly. Anton here. You commented earlier how we need a crisis to focus attention, and it struck me, of course, one, I see a yin yang, you know, on that, but I also can't help feeling that the crises that we are facing as a society, as a species, be they the pandemic, be it global warming, climate change, are all things that are intended to show us that we have to recognize our oneness, that we cannot solve them as an individual corporation, as an individual nation, as individual human beings, without realizing that, as I often say, we are not, you know, we appear to be separate leaves, but we are in effect one tree. And I'm wondering, you know, global climate change is not just global warming, but a global warning as to what we have to do and how we must get together. You know, like your thoughts, is Earth, therefore, you would agree, I guess, would be conscious that is doing this for the good of humanity, that, you know, coronavirus is not just a bad thing when it comes to the long-term picture. Thousands of years from now, we will have taught humanity how to work together, hopefully.
Yes, well, it's a symptom of the entire complex of pressure that nature is putting on us to change, as you're pointing out. And I think that if humanity learns how to work together and how to appreciate the oneness of not only all people, but all species and the entire environment of the planet, we can live in a world that is harmonious, beautiful, and supportive of life and development in a very positive way, without creating waste over on one side in order to have our enjoyment on the other. So I did want to conclude with a short quote from Sri Aurobindo, and that is, "The most vital issue of the age is whether the future progress of humanity is to be governed by the modern economic and materialistic mind of the West, or by a nobler pragmatism guided, uplifted, and enlightened by spiritual culture and knowledge." And that's really our challenge.
Hi, Santosh, Mike Hebel again. Before you go, I like the way you put your talk together today. And as I know you're the editor-in-chief of Lotus, is there one or two publications that you have produced in the last several years that I could follow up or others could follow up on as a way to supplement the content of your talk today?
Not directly. What we publish at Lotus is primarily the major writings of Sri Aurobindo in the US editions. And I do a daily blog, and I've been doing that for over 12 years, and systematically go page by page through Sri Aurobindo's major writings, and take up whatever the topic of the day is that next page. Today's topic actually was something about pain management. And you'd be surprised at how much is in there. So you can look up any subject you want on the blog, and there's a search bar. It'll go through 12 years of blog posts, I mean, thousands of posts, and give you the quotes and the locations of any statements that relate to that, whether it's supramental or whether it's evolution or whether it's pain management. But we don't actually have any books that directly address this topic. I've covered the topic a couple of times with a group called selfgrowth.com. And on the Lotus Press website, we have 2 video interviews up there where they interviewed me on the subject. One was the background interview, and the other one was the practical applications interview. Covered a lot of the same ground as today, but in a question and answer format.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Santosh, for this wonderful talk and beautiful interaction. And thank you everyone for joining in. I will be reaching out to Santosh more often than not in the future, so that we can have him consistently present at the fellowship. These topics are extremely important, and I personally feel that both Mother and Sri Aurobindo are as relevant today as they were when they were in their respective bodies, and writing about these stuff. So in fact, I would say that they have become even more relevant, in particular with respect to how the mind works, how the mind needs to be transcended, what happens when mind gets transcended, what are the sources of inspiration that we come in contact with, and so on and so forth. At the fellowship, there has been a growing interest in making Sri Aurobindo more and more relevant and contemporary. And that is something that we are emphasizing on, and we are going to emphasize as time progresses. I also wanted to remind us all that Sri Aurobindo's 150th birth anniversary is approaching. It is on 15th of August. I'll be giving a talk next Sunday on that topic. So if you have some time, please spare some time and join us at the fellowship. Thank you once again, and thank you very much, Santosh, for your talk and for your presentation. Namaste. Bye-bye.
Bye.